You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 20 minutes we're going to be talking about Legend of the Sea Devils, and for the next 30 minutes after that we're going to be talking about the trailer for the next episode of Doctor Who, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I'm John.
And I'm Matt.
Okay, in a nutshell then, what did you think? Matt, what did you think of Legend of the Sea Devils?
I didn't think it was very special, but I quite liked it. I thought it was all right. I think it looked really good, and there were jokes in it. It just didn't.
They weren't very funny jokes, but
no. But this is Chris Chibnall's jokes aren't very funny jokes. He's not a comedy writer, I don't think. But at least there was enough going on to gloss over the usual kind of here's what's going on in the plot dialogue and the sort of the exposition. So
yeah, it wasn't actually
distract from that.
It wasn't actually terribly exposition-y, this one. At least it didn't feel like it.
But it's fairly straightforward, I guess. I mean,
yeah, there wasn't too much to. There was a lot of standing around talking, but then it's Doctor Who, and that's kind of par for the course. John, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty much a standard episode, which is just being pushed into a special slot, really. There's nothing overly wonderful about it, bar seeing the Sea Devils again. But again, there's nothing to mark out as anything particularly worth, having a big special in the middle of Easter for.
And yet, clearly, it was always written to be a special. This wasn't an episode that was... Although he said the kernel of the idea was something for Flux, that he sort of brought out of Flux because it wouldn't fit into Flux and turned into a special. But the actual episode itself was always written as the special, I think.
Yeah.
So it's slightly odd that it came in at like the regular sort of 45 to 50 minutes. Which kind of shows how thin it was. I tell you what, cards on the table, I think the elephant in the room is Planet of the Dead. I think the comparison that you were always going to have for this one was, is this better or not than Planet of the Dead? And frankly, I think it was about on a par with it, really. Maybe a bit better,
ahead.
But
yeah, slightly ahead. I think it looked really nice. I think because that's Harry Wang's first ever TV direction.
Yeah,
top of my head. Yeah. I thought it was a good job for that. Some of the editing was a little choppy. I think there were a few moments where you get references to conversations we haven't seen, and characters go from place to place, which doesn't quite follow on.
I thought it had slightly the opposite problem. I thought we saw a little bit too much of where people came from and where they were going to, and it kept dragging the pace of the thing down. But I think that's been a problem throughout the Chris Chibnall era, is that the pace of it's never quite been what it should be.
I vote for it being better than Planet of the Dead. I
think Planet of the Dead's slightly underrated, so I think it's better than you remember Planet of the Dead being, but probably on a par with how good Planet of the Dead actually was.
Except we rewatched Planet of the Dead fairly recently for the podcast, and I think that the crime of Planet of the Dead is they have this amazing location, genuinely, like, they go all in for the location and they don't really do much with it. Whereas this, unlike, was it Curse of the Black Spot, it's a pirate story that has, ships and, floating ships and fighting on ships, and the ships actually go out to sea.
It was Curse of the Black Spot.
What occurred to me before this is, I suddenly realised that pirate stories isn't something that Doctor Who's done before, because smuggler stories are much easier, because smuggler stories have all the feeling of the pirate story, but they take place cheaply on land, whereas pirate stories are just, until now, too expensive to achieve, because you need at least 2 ships for a pirate story to work, because there has to be.
Yeah, this looked like it was probably the most expensive Doctor Who story there's ever been, pretty much. It had to be there or thereabouts, I would have thought. This was an incredibly expensive looking episode, because even the sets, right? I don't know.
There's a really nice sense of space on those ships as well.
Yeah, and what they did with the sets was they surrounded the sets either with green screen, so that when you were up on deck, you either had green screen all around, or else the set was big enough that they were able to put in a backdrop that itself was big enough that you had that sense of them being out of doors. And while they were on the deck of the ship, I was never convinced that they were out of doors, but I was always impressed by how close to giving that impression they were coming, considering what they'd done before. Because of the black spot, they actually filmed it on a ship out of doors, albeit it was in a port. It was, you know, tethered in at land at the time. And so for the fairly small amount of time you spent on deck on that ship, that was convincing. In this, I was less convinced, but at the same time, I thought the art direction on it and everything else on it meant I didn't really mind that it didn't feel like you were out of doors, because it felt more like a kind of subjective version of a movie rather than a movie that was trying to be wholly authentic.
I think I got there's an irony for me, and I watched Death on the Nile, the Ken Branagh's Death on the Nile over the weekend, and I loved it. I thought it was amazing. It didn't look realistic at all. It looked like they were on like a set with green screen behind them and the Nile projected onto the green screen. But that felt somehow, it didn't feel authentic, but it felt appropriate for what they were showing. And Curse of the Black Spot, yes, it was on board a ship, but I never got the impression that they had actually left the dock. There was never, from memory of it, it never felt like they'd actually gone out onto the high seas. It always felt like it was a ship in dock. Whereas this, even though it was clearly sort of special effects and Cardiff made up to look like China, quite successfully, I thought. I kind of bought it. I bought it, the mediation of it rather than the authenticness of it.
Yeah, because when this era has gone abroad before, it's gone abroad to actually look like abroad. And this one, obviously COVID has limited what they can do. So in the circumstances, that was genuinely impressive on what they could pull off.
Yeah.
Oh, how weird. I've just realised I didn't bring up Legend of the Sea Devils before we started on Wikipedia. And now I'm finding out the reason why is because it doesn't have a page on Wikipedia.
No, it's just a specials page on Wikipedia.
Yeah, how very strange.
Well,
presumably it will do at some point.
Yeah, they're busy writing it, presumably.
Yeah.
But previously, the Wikipedia page has always been there long before it's been on. It's just been waiting to be filled in. So it's very strange that there isn't one for this. What did you think of the plot and the slightly backwards forwards nature of the plot? Because there was the whole, we go back in time. Were you ever at any point convinced, for example, that the ship they were looking for was anything other than the ship that the Sea Devils were using? It seemed like blatantly obvious that was the ship to me.
No, I mean it's all centered around a MacGuffin, isn't it? So it's a straightforward plot. There's no real twists in that at all. So yeah, it was quite a thin plot for 50, even for the 50 minutes. As you said, the pacing of it again. I think that's been a problem with Chibnall. Is there's not enough plot for 50 minutes in his stories generally.
I see Stephen Moffat's approach was always less plot, more character. So oftentimes he'd give you something like The Girl Who Waited is a great example. There's no story to speak of in The Girl Who Waited. So it's entirely about the situation and the people who are stuck in the situation. And that was the thing. There was that scene on the little shipping boat, the fishermen on the little shipping boat, where you got the first appearance of I can't remember what they called it. It's presumably an anagram. Yeah, it was an anagram of Merca, wasn't it? But except with the letters turned upside down, so they're W's and H's instead of M's and R's and things. Point being, somebody like Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat or the Stones of Blood, because that's a great example with the couple in the camping, and we get a scene with the couple, and we get to learn who the couple are, and then they get killed by the ogre. And Stephen Moffat or Russell T Davies would have given us something exactly the same. He'd have had two people on that fishing boat, and they would have had a conversation before the Merca turns up, and we'd have got to learn something about them. And it wouldn't have been much, but it would have been like a comedic scene or a very character-heavy scene, something like when in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, or whatever it's called, the first Christopher Chibnall, when we get the granddad at the site where the cranes are, and he's on the phone, and we get to learn a little something about him before he gets bumped off. With this, you get this fisherman in the boat, and he's all by himself, and he's just sitting there doing nothing, and then the Merca turns up and eats him, and it's like, okay, we got to see the monster, that's great, but we didn't get to learn who the person is, so we didn't get to care who the person is, and because we didn't get to care who the person is, what the monster did had no import and had no impact. So it was all about the special effect and nothing about the monster. And I don't know, the whole episode just felt a bit kind of like it was moving from one thing to another thing without really selling you too much on the things that it was doing. The guy whose family will get killed off at the start, you know, I think his mother gets one line, "Don't go out and die," or something. It's like one line. We don't get to learn who she is. We needed a scene before the Sea Devils or before the pirate turns up. We needed a scene before that to really get to learn who everybody was. And I may be remembering wrong, but it didn't feel like we got it. Because the father, I was thinking, he's a decent actor. I recognised him. I couldn't tell you without having a page for it on Wiki who he was. But I recognised him and I thought, oh, he's going to be in the episode some more than this. And then he's gone. And it's like he's gone before he's made an impact in the story. So I don't know.
It extends for Sea Devils themselves. So the problem I've always had with the Silurians and Sea Devils is we're told that they're actually an honourable race who are misunderstood, and then they all do really evil things. So when the guy stabs the Sea Devil in the end, and the Doctor shows this kind of superficial sort of, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." Well, yeah, he should. They were bad monsters. They were evil monsters, and they were presented as evil monsters. There wasn't any sort of dimension to them.
Yeah,
they were just marauders, basically.
Yeah, there was a point midway through where she says you're not like this, but that never developed into anything, did it?
Well, also they're not like this. They're just not very nice. There's occasionally one nice Sea Devil or Silurian that goes, well, maybe we should negotiate, but then the rest of them like take over.
It's very similar, to the Hungry Earth. The Hungry Earth Chibnall doesn't have any of that sort of depth that Hulk gives him in his scripts. It's say more warriors to deep. There's no deeper meanings to them. They're not a metaphor for anything. There's no.
But in Hungry Earth, at least you had the two Silurians who were opposed to each other, so you got an idea that conflict was taking place. In here, the best you got was, I don't know, a line from the Doctor saying something to the tune of, "Oh, I've never met a Sea Devil with agency before." You know, she might as well have said that out loud because that's what she meant. It was a little in-joke, really. But the trouble was, it was an in-joke that was so pointed. It also pointed at the fact that in this, despite the fact that they've given them agency without character.
Well, yeah, if they have... Sorry, yeah. If their leader is the only one with any character, the rest of it was a bunch of extras in the background. Just
there was one other one that spoke, wasn't there?
Yeah, that was it. But there's no. You're back to the old school of Aliens, where it's one man, the leader talking. That's the motivation of the whole species.
But then the faces were entirely animated by CG, from what I could tell. So
yes,
to have more than one Sea Devil talking would have been prohibitively expensive.
But that's the same in the original series, though. You always had like a slightly more expensive mask on the main Silurian, and then probably sort of slightly cruder masks on the other ones, and they sort of stayed in the back as henchmen. But Chibnall does basically rely on memories of Hulk to sort of get nuance across, I think.
Did you, changing the subject slightly though, and while we're there, what did you think of the Sea Devils, the visual representation of the talking and the animation, I suppose?
I thought they were bigger than that. So to start with, they seemed to change size because that statue, the initial statue,
was huge.
Yeah. But it was sort of almost suggesting that was life size when the Sea Devil cracked out, like it was actually a Sea Devil turned to stone, and then they sort of presented the initial bits of the Sea Devil with people looking slightly further up than they would normally, and the Sea Devil sort of looming over people. And then gradually the height of the Sea Devil reduced as the episode went on until John Bishop was at eye line with Sea Devils towards the end. So I thought that was kind of slightly variable.
Yeah.
Well, I quite liked them. I mean, I liked the costume more than the mask or the animatronic face. I think if you're going to make an animatronic face, there's bits of their lips don't really move, but then they have
the
a
neck
flashing
instead,
thing, so
wasn't
it
it?
sort of translates.
It
But
was
I'm
the
not sure
neck
if that
that was doing the thing to let you know it was talking, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
So they were talking out of their necks as opposed to really out of their mouths,
Yeah.
which I thought was a fairly nice touch. Because I think if they'd have tried to get the mouth to move along with the words, it could have ended up looking absolutely stupid. And actually, thinking about it, I remember reading now, somebody said something about they filmed the whole thing and there's something about the Sea Devils looked really stupid and they had to go back and redo the CGI to change it for something else. I wonder if that's what it was. I wonder if they had the mouths moving and it looked stupid and they went back and flattened out the mouths and put the necks instead, because I thought the neck thing looked really effective and I thought it looked as authentic as you needed it to. I mean, these are supposed to be reptiles, right?
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have larynxes the same as we do anyway. So if it's talking out of its neck and essentially projecting it out of its mouth, that's not a million miles away from where our voices come from, but it's a different way of actually creating the voice. So I don't know, it felt to me like a fairly thought through choice and it seemed to work.
And it's a sort of an original Silurian thing, where the original Silurians, obviously didn't move their mouths, but they had sort of flashing third eyes to let you know when they were speaking.
That was just warriors, wasn't it? It was the original. Was a weapon rather than.
It was a weapon. Yeah.
Didn't it flash as well, or did it not flash?
No,
not when they were speaking. I don't think.
No.
Yeah. I think in the first one, their mouths did move a bit, but just not very much.
Yeah, they thought it did for warriors, but
they
made a mistake. Yeah,
they just wobbled emphatically when they.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I don't know what else about it. The ships and the special effects. There was an incredible amount of special effects. It felt at one point I was sort of scratching my head thinking, I'm not sure we've seen anything yet that wasn't a special effect. Obviously we had, but you know what I mean? There were so many. It was starting to feel so ubiquitous.
Did we get the impression they had a pot of money left over from the savings they made from the New Year's special? The fact that the New Year's special had such a small cast and
well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't think it was that they accidentally saved enough money to make this. I think the idea is that they spent the money on this instead of on that. So yeah, the payoff for one was the cost of the other. I think that works because I thought the New Year's. I noticed after we recorded our episode, there was a lot of pushback on the New Year's special about how cheap it looked. But I didn't think it looked any more. I didn't think it looked any less expensive than it needed to look to get away with the story it was telling. So I thought that was fine. And so if what you get for having a cheap episode like this is a nice, expensive looking one like this, I think that's fine too. Because although I kind of got a little startled by the ubiquity of the special effects halfway through, I think mostly they were well enough done. And they fit together sort of aesthetically with everything else that was going on, that the whole thing felt like a nice, consistent production. So I didn't have any problems with it on that front. Don't know. What did you think of the amount of special effects and how well they worked?
Yeah, they worked fine for me because it was. I mean, it's you've got ships going up into the sky and ships at the bottom of the ocean floor collapsing. I mean, the idea is obviously to give you some eye candy to look at almost here, so to speak. It kind of does I suppose rescue the series up for a casual viewer after Eve of the Daleks was quite blatantly a one set cheapo job.
I don't think casual viewers really think of it like that though, but yeah.
I didn't mind the special effects because, as I was saying before, this sort of story, I think that slight sense of unreality works in its favour. That that they're not going for authenticity here. They're going for kind of, I don't know. They're going for something heightened here.
It's like a theatrical thing, isn't it? Almost.
Yeah. So the kind of I quite like the scenic shots. So the sort of shots of ships on the sea, shots of the bay, all of which were presumably recreated in the computer. They were kind of nicely done. They looked good. If they'd gone abroad, which I don't know.
I don't think they did.
No, they didn't. They didn't go abroad. I don't know whether whether they would have gone abroad if it wasn't for the pandemic and spent the money on traveling abroad rather than the CGI. Whether that would have been as successful, or whether it would have been a different sort of thing.
It probably would have been either the Spanish or the South African coast, but I think they recreated it well enough, and they either through luck or by using the right filters and grading, they managed to make it look sunny enough that you never really thought, oh, they're in Wales.
Well, it's rainy, which is impressive, because that kind of is a sort of a not what you think of China, because we're all sort of Western and but actually it works. It makes it feel slightly. It didn't feel like Wales. It felt like another country, and that part of that is the costumes and the sets and I guess the music as well.
Yeah, the music was okay. His music's improved every time, pretty much throughout the whole thing. And although there's still a couple of things he does where I just kind of go, I think mostly the music's become less sort of regimented almost. There was always a problem, I thought, with the music early on in Siga Nakalola's Doctor Who career, where it felt like there wasn't any variety or any sort of diversity, kineticism, any oomph or push with it. With this now, the music seems to fit to the story, but it can't make up for the lack of pace in the editing. And I think it's that pace in the editing where, every shot, every scene seems to start with a little bit of setting up and seems to end with a little bit of overflow. It's almost like there's no. Do you know the famous jump shot in Kubrick where you go from the bone to the spaceship? Now, I'm not expecting Doctor Who to do that, but most directors and most editors will look for ways to get from one scene to another where you have something that approaches in a much more subtle and more low-key way, something like that, so that you keep a flow between the scenes. If you can leave a scene with the same thing that starts the next scene, even if it's not exactly the same thing, but just something that represents it or something that balances with it, then it keeps a flow between the scenes. But I think the trouble with this and with this sort of era as a whole has been that there's been no connection between the scenes in that sort of rhythmic sense. You've just been, this is finished, that one starts, that one stops, the next one starts, and it's always like that, and it never feels like there's a huge rhythm. And even the episodes that I've enjoyed the most have had that problem. It's just when an episode's really working, it takes your mind off the problems that you're having, and you don't mind them so much, even if they're still there. With this, it just, for me, didn't feel like it was working enough so that all the problems kept getting flagged in my mind all the time. And I certainly didn't hate it, and I'll probably like it more when I rewatch it. But yeah, it felt like a bit of a chore at times watching it, which is not what a Easter special with Sea Devils set in China with tons of special effects should be. I didn't laugh at any of the jokes. I don't know. Should we talk about Yasmin for a couple of minutes, or do you want to say something, Matt? Well,
I've just said I haven't laughed really for 4 years.
Yeah, no.
Just in general. So.
No, but you're right. This era, but then I didn't laugh a lot during Russell T Davies. There were moments for sure, but not a lot. I think Stephen Moffat was a lot wittier, or a lot closer to my sense of humour, I suppose. Yasmin, we have to talk about it.
Do we have to call it that, though?
Well, that's what everybody calls it, so we'll call it that, because then people will know what we're talking about.
At some point, they had Yahoo right there.
It's now previously I think it was the last episode where they started to talk about that stuff towards the end of the episode, because yes, that's right, because it was the when they were having, and instead of the scenes getting shorter, they were actually getting longer, so they could pack more of this stuff in. And in that episode, I really didn't mind because it seemed to suit how the episode was expanding. So as the scenes were contracting, the actual themes were expanding, and so I didn't mind the fact that it wasn't balanced the way it should have been. Here, though, they decided to not really touch on it at all until about the 3/4 mark, and then from the 3/4 mark to the end, almost half of what we saw was to do with the Yasmin stuff, and it felt like it wasn't layered through the texture of the episode so much as bolted on at the end. It didn't feel a natural part of the story they were telling. Yeah, and I like stuff like that when it feels natural, and when it doesn't feel natural, it kind of irks you a little bit. Not that it's there, because I think it was absolutely right that it was there, but what irked me was the way that they couldn't get it into the episode in a more natural way.
Yeah, because it's a deliberately that one line on the seabed, isn't it? That's the entirety of seeding it. And then to the end, the thing is, you're still in the same place at the end of the episode as you were at the beginning with it, so it's not really dealt with. It's kind of one half awkward conversation, which is kind of appropriate because that's where Whittaker's doctors approach relationships.
It's brought it out into the open, is what it has done.
Yeah. I mean, it's drawing. So I didn't have a problem with how it was revealed in this episode, because it's a continuing thing. So it was actually, it started in flux with a few looks. I think they're building it quite subtly, and now they're developing this sort of idea that Jodie Whittaker's doctor can't commit, but sort of can commit, but wants to live in the present. And I quite like all of that stuff, but it's also obviously building it up as something for the final Jodie Whittaker story. So it's kind of setting up that relationship, and they've spent sort of 3, 4, 5 episodes doing it, which I think is a good amount of time to kind of convince you that there is something there. They're not just dropping it in this story so that they can conclude it in the next story. They're kind of built slowly, and I think it has taken it. It did take it to a different place, because this is the doctor's chance to react to Yasmin's feelings, whereas the previous episode, it was all a sort of a secret, and the doctor was sort of intuiting something. This is the doctor openly coming out and saying, yeah, I know about it, I feel the same. So that's moving to one place. I can't do anything about it, because eventually I will change, you will die, I'm effectively immortal. The whole usual doctorish thing.
Well, that's Chibnall's version of the conversation they had in School Reunion, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's just a sort of a recap, and then I'm expecting the next story to be kind of, if not built around this relationship, it's going to be a sort of a fundamental thing in this story, because Jodie Whittaker's doctor's going to die, and
the next episode is going to
leave.
Yeah, the next episode is going to be their army of ghosts.
Yeah,
where lots of threads that you didn't realise weren't tied up suddenly get tied together. And we've seen in the trailer there were lots of threads that we didn't need, that we didn't think were going to be there, but there are. I mean, there's one really obvious one that we knew was going to be there, I think, the Master, but all the other threads were things that we thought were either finished with or so long in the past. We'll get to it. But the point I think that I'm making is, for me, it looks like the next episode is going to be something akin to, albeit, not tonally, Army of Ghosts, where there's a story, but the story is secondary to the narrative that the characters are going through, right? I think it feels like that. That's where it's going to go, like Matt was just saying.
Could be Journey's End.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. But I think Army of Ghosts, the thing I'm talking about really with Army of Ghosts is they're separated by a wall at the end, separated by a wall that represents a universe. And I think the next episode has to do that in some way with Jodie Whittaker and Yaz, because otherwise, how is that story going to end? I mean, you had that line in this one, didn't you? Can we just stay like this forever?
Well, why can't we just be in the present? Can we just live in the present for some time? Which for a Time Lord to say that is kind of perverse. But I think that's perverse on purpose. The Doctor can't live in the present. The whole point of the Doctor is that she doesn't live in the present. She lives in the...
Or she lives in the present forever.
Yeah, the present means nothing to her.
No, but it does to... I think it does to Yaz, and I think that was the... that was kind of the accession she was making, sort of.
It's kind of a repeat of that beat from the end of Fear Her, isn't it? Right at the end. I think that there's a storm coming. That was it, wasn't it? So
that was a terrible ending to Fear Her, though.
Oh yes.
I didn't think this was as bad as that. I say, have either of you got more that you want to bring up about this? Because I don't think there was a huge amount to talk about in this, really. Sea Devil's voices, maybe? I think they weren't. Do we know who played the lead Sea Devil? Because it didn't sound like Nicholas Briggs to me, although that's who I was kind of expecting.
No.
No, we don't. That'll be one for our listeners or viewers, I guess, to look up for themselves. Well, they probably already know because they probably watched the end credits.
Well, they've got a Wikipedia page.
Yeah, well.
So Wikipedia doesn't have a page for this, but it's about the three. It's got a 3 specials page. And it says Jo Martin is set to reprise her role as the fugitive Doctor in one of the final 2 specials. So Jo Martin wasn't in that episode unless I missed her somewhere.
Nope.
So if that's to be believed, then, because one of my things about the final is I don't think the Timeless Children thing, the Fugitive Doctor Timeless Children thing, I don't think they've got enough juice out of that. I think they need more juice to A, justify the idea, and B, give Jo Martin a really good something to do to justify the fact that she was really, really good in it. Really good in Fugitive of June.
If Jo Martin was only in COVID-affected scenes in Flux, and they filmed this with Flux, Jo Martin's not going to take a significant role in any of the specials, because if they were having her playing a significant role in one of the specials, she'd have been bubbled with the rest of the cast and she'd have been able to take a proper part in Flux. I would have thought, now it's possible that during the course of filming all of these things, stuff changed. But it doesn't. I don't think Jo Martin. If Jo Martin's in it, I don't think it will be in a big role.
No, but there is that Chekhov's gun from the end of Flux, where obviously she throws the watch into the heart of the TARDIS. So you'd think that that's coming up in that last special.
Yeah, well, maybe or maybe not. Yeah,
that's that would be our conversation from that period, where we were debating whether that is a Chekhov's gun or whether the refusal to open the fob watch is the whole point, and it won't come back because it doesn't need to, because the contents of it is a kind of anti-Doctor Who, is sort of unnecessary. I thought it would come back. It would come back at Jodie Whittaker's final crucial hour, that she's facing a crisis so bad that she has to somehow bring in the knowledge and the kind of the essence of these kind of fugitive doctors back to her, in which case Jo Martin would symbolically appear, I guess.
Yeah,
I still think it's possible or probable.
I think either way. I mean, given that we've had the stuff with the fob watch, I suspect that on the balance of betting odds, the chances are that the fob watch will return. But I think the point we made before was, if it didn't return, then that would be A, not terribly surprising, and B, entirely understandable within the themes of the stories that they've been telling. So yeah, it could be, and it could not be. The moment is Schrodinger's fob watch, right?
Yeah.
But also, given we're talking about the trailer now. We'll go back and give Legend of the Sea Devils a score in a minute. Let's just talk about the trailer, right? Let's just talk about what may or may not happen next time. We see the Master, bearded, long hair, a little bit like we see John Sim. Not beard and long hair, but John Sim as a sort of degenerate Master almost in the end of time. That seems to be, again, maybe what Chris Chibnall's doing with this one. So there's a sort of sense in which Chris Chibnall is sort of taking the beats of the best of, or not even the best of, but taking the beats of the sort of momentous moments from Russell T Davies stories and doing his own spin on them to an extent, which I think, to be fair, is kind of what Stephen Moffat did a lot of the time anyway. Stephen Moffat kind of said, well, if that's what Russell T Davies did, then I can take the bones of that, the skeleton of that, and put a different kind of flesh on it. And I think maybe that's what Chris Chibnall's planning to do. So I don't know. I get the sense that some of the next episode is going to feel slightly familiar. More so than just returning characters.
Where did we last leave the Master? I've forgotten. It's something to do with Cybermen.
On Gallifrey.
Okay.
He says Gallifrey's about to get all living matter on Gallifrey is about to get destroyed by that device, whatever it was at the end of the Timeless Children. And then just in the background, you hear the Master's voice saying, basically, my TARDIS is through this door here.
Okay. That's the one where Jodie Whittaker willingly leaves someone to sacrifice themselves for her.
Which she does again in Legend of the Sea Devils.
Tom Baker has to be punched unconscious in Ark of Space to stop to allow somebody to take the sacrifice for him. But Whittaker's doctor twice now has just gone, oh, okay, you're right. It is more appropriate for you to die. Here you go.
But in Image of the Fendal, Matt, Tom Baker walks up to somebody, hands them a gun, says, shoot yourself, and that'll sort it out.
Yeah, but
so, six of one, half a dozen of the other.
He was a baddie. I would say Image of the Fendal is an undoctorish thing. Ark in Space, and I've said this before, Ark in Space is the more doctory. It's more doctory to want to sacrifice himself and then be forced out of his control for somebody else to sacrifice themselves.
Yeah and no. I mean, so many stories. Death to the Daleks ends up with somebody sacrificing himself to blow up the Daleks and make sure the medicine goes to the right place. All sorts of stories end up.
Yes, but there's.
I know what you're saying.
There's a very, very specific moment where the Doctor passes on the responsibility to someone else directly. That doesn't happen in Death of the Daleks. It does happen in Ark in Space in a very particular way, and that feels like the most doctorish thing to do. There's something about the Doctor being convinced very briefly that she shouldn't sacrifice herself and that this guy should, just by saying, well, it's not really my time, so I'm happy to do it. And you'd expect more pushback from any Doctor for that sort of thing to happen.
Isn't that what happens in the Ark in Space, though?
No, he gets punched out and dragged out. The working class guy who's completely out of sync with everybody else's performance socks him in the chin, and then he sort of wakes up in a. Oh yeah, he explains afterwards he woke up in a survival pod or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, it just occurred to me that this once again jarred that this is a Chris Chibnall thing.
Or a Ella Road thing.
Or it could, well,
who knows?
Yeah. It's quite Sayward, isn't it, as well? Because he leaves Orsini to blow up Davros, technically in Revelation as well, and so forth. So
it happens a lot.
Yeah.
It's a Doctor Who thing. It's how you do it. I think that's what Matt's saying. It's how you do it, whether you do it in a doctorish way or not. I think the mitigating factor here is the character was supposed to have died 200 years before and had been living an unnatural life for 200 years, apparently awake the whole time in this sort of cell thing. Who knows? Yeah. Going back to what we were talking about just a minute ago, and if anybody doesn't want spoilers for the finale, then I think we've jumped that shark several minutes ago when Matt started talking about Joe Martin. There was a rumour that the last one, and I think this was just somebody coming up with something spurious and people believe in them, is going to be called Rise of the Timeless Child.
Okay.
But like I say, I got the impression less that somebody had found that out than that somebody had made that up. So, but it wouldn't be a huge surprise if it was, because I think we're all of us are kind of expecting at least a little bit of that storyline to come back, right?
I want it to, because I think there's more. If it doesn't, then it feels like they haven't wrung enough story out of it. It's if it doesn't come back, then it's just an idea that's been thrown there, and kind of it's sort of informed one story slightly, and there's sort of bits of revelation, but it never actually drove a story. It never actually sort of did anything.
Well, it sort of drove, in the end, Flux, because if you think what Flux was about, that was entirely driven by the Timeless Child situation, because the division came out of the idea of where the Timeless Child came from, and they were all related to each other sort of back at the beginning of that. So it kind of drove Flux more than you thought it did. I wonder if Flux had been 10 episodes instead of 6, if it wouldn't have driven Flux a lot more. And because Flux was sort of reduced by 4 episodes from what originally it would have been, we probably lost some Timeless Child stuff. But yeah, that being the case, if Flux lost some Timeless Child stuff, then still it would make sense for you to go back there in the extra special that they suddenly found that they had at the end of this. Speaking of which, would Legend of the Sea Devils have worked as a regeneration story?
No, not at all.
No.
There's a bit there where she's about to put this thing together and make a sacrifice, a little bit, I suppose, like the one in Caves of Androzani, where you kind of think, oh, would that have been the regeneration? It's not a million miles away, actually, from the thing that actually causes the regeneration in the end of time, or the 7th thing that causes regeneration at the end of.
So was this a possible regeneration story?
Yeah, so, before they had the BBC's Centenary episode, this was going to be Jodie Whittaker's last episode.
So was this slot going to be her last episode? Did they plan it to be Legend of the Sea Devils, or did Legend of the Sea Devils? So what I mean is, Legend of the Sea Devils feels like it was drawn out of that bit of Flux where they were kind of touring the world, going to places.
Yeah, but at the point at which these changes happened, as I understand it, this story was going to be the regeneration story, but they took the regeneration out of this story at about the same time as they put the Sea Devils in, because originally this was written without the Sea Devils, and they added the Sea Devils at the time they knew they were getting a Centenary special, so the regeneration came out of it when the Sea Devils went into it. But it would have been a story along the same lines, where there's a ship from 200 years in the past affecting what the pirates 200 years in that ship's future are looking for, and it was going to have that circular time paradox element.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think it would have been very similar as a story, but I'm just wondering if we can see the vestiges of what might have been a regeneration in it.
I don't know. I don't really think I could. Because it doesn't have any sort of sense of event that the regeneration stories have had in the 21st century.
So it's set in China, you know.
Unless my instinct, and unless I don't know, because I haven't read up on it and I don't know anything, but it feels like the actual Centenary special is clearly written as a regeneration story. So could that not have been planned for this slot? And then when they got the 3rd slot, they kind of pushed that script on by a few months and then slotted in Legend of the Sea Devils. Because surely there's even without the Sea Devils and with a few more things added, this isn't a regeneration story. There's no way that this would have been written.
I completely agree that would make sense, but my understanding of it is that's not what happened.
Okay, well, bizarre.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It seems like this is the extra one that they put in, and that one would always have been the regeneration, and it would have been in this spot or whatever. But no, from what I could make out, I've not read a huge amount about it, but the things that I did read pointed in the other direction, that this one would have been a regeneration story, and that one is the extra one. But I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong.
Okay.
And people watching or listening to this would probably have read a lot more than I have and probably know. So, you know, probably going to get lots of comments on the YouTube channel
whole
in
story,
about an hour.
There is Richard Molesworth is going to write an entire book on Flux, what happened to Flux, what the original intent was, what sort of fragments of scripts are where, whether the Legend of the Sea Devils was originally like, because it feels like the Sontarans. It feels like, it's even the title. It feels like, what is it, War of the Sontarans? Legend of the Sea Devils feels like another kind of historical moment in flux, which would have balanced out the whole series in a sort of 10 episode sense. There is a sort of missing 10 episode series somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're getting kind of fragments of it here and there. Eve of the Daleks doesn't feel like a fragment of it. Eve of the Daleks feels like a COVID episode. It feels like a hastily written, but in that sense, fairly successful COVID necessitated episode. But the rest, this does feel like something out of flux that's been sort of pulled out of there and dropped into a special slot. It doesn't feel special in that way. Doesn't feel like it's a regeneration story. It feels like a sort of self-contained thing, the break from something bigger, I think.
Should we give it a score, unless you want to say any more, and then just spend a couple of minutes talking about you know what? I mean, unless anybody has anything else they want to bring up, but I mean, we're literally recording this after we've just seen it, so. Matt, do you want to give it a score then?
Oh yeah, 7.
Fair enough.
It was fun. It was sort of it suitably buckled swashes. So it's
it probably swashed buckles more than it buckled swashes. I think buckling swashes is probably something that's taken the life right out of it.
Oh, either way, it did bits of both.
John?
Yeah, I think I'd go with a 6 on it. I think, as you say, it was a bit choppy, as you say, from scene to scene. It didn't quite flow. There's the bones of something very good there. It's lovely to see Sea Devils again. I liked most of the sort of the orc playing of Phasma and stuff. So yeah, 6.
I really loved the way it looked, and I loved the Sea Devils, and I liked the ideas, and I kind of liked the story. I just thought the execution of it fell flat, so I'm going to give it a 6 as well. So, Ace and Tegan. I mean, when Tegan came up on the screen, Janet Fielding came up on the screen, my first instinct was, I recognise that person, because she does look, I wouldn't say significantly different, but you know what I mean. Janet Fielding's not been on screen hardly at all these last 30 years. So 40 years nearly, because she gave up acting not long after Doctor Who, if I remember rightly. So I was entirely unprepared for it to be Tegan, and just kind of like, that was an Australian accent as well, right? And I actually paused it and went back, and I was like, oh right, it is Tegan. So I'm not sure that was quite how that was supposed to work, but I guess when she says the word Ace, you know what's happening there, and then you realise it's a double whammy when you see the two companions together. So, I mean, what was your initial reaction? Shock, surprise, and was it a happy surprise, or was it a, oh no, really? That.
I mean, it was a surprise, because as you say, Janet Fielding isn't an actress, she quit acting. So Janet Fielding is basically, her presence is the Big Finish legacy. I think Sophie Aldred, I think part of Sophie Aldred being there is the DVD trailers.
Yes.
Because that's had such a sort of a huge emotional impact, seeing these little sort of vignettes played out. I'm up for it. It'd be interesting to see how their performance works, because neither of them have done that much kind of big genre drama acting outside of kind of Doctor Who fan stuff. I think Sophie Aldred's kind of moved more into stage and audio and presenting.
Sophie Aldred's a big name in children's TV. Yeah. Very big name in children's TV, but for voice work.
Yes, yeah. So it would be interesting. I mean, I did get an emotional kick out of seeing them. The same emotional kick I get out of those really well-made DVD Blu-ray trailers, which work perfectly well for me. I I was more excited seeing them than I was seeing the Daleks. So seeing the Daleks in this kind of trio, I just thought, oh, the Daleks are going to be in it, because it's got to that stage where, you know, Daleks aren't really special. They're far from special. I think even though with Chibnall they've only appeared in the specials, it's still, you know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was the one part of the trailer you just didn't expect. You can see that the Master might have come back. You know that there's a regeneration happening. The Daleks, also, but I think it must be partly motivated by the fact that it's a Centenary Special, so it's got to celebrate the history, you know, of maybe the show of the BBC in that way, and bringing those kisses to the past is exactly what you need it to.
That's a good point.
The only thing I didn't like was they were delivering Chibnall dialogue, really.
Yes, this is my thing, and I don't think it's. See, I've made this point throughout this entire era. I don't think it's the dialogue in itself. I think it's the tone of the production, which doesn't lend itself to accentuating the life that could be in the dialogue. I think the dialogue is not a million miles away from Russell T Davies's dialogue.
Well, it's kind of a very much say what you see. It's almost like writing an audio drama.
But Russell T Davies's. Do you watch Russell T Davies's stuff? Because his stuff is written like that, but it's produced big and brash and colourful and bright, and that's
it has
what
character.
Brings. Yeah, but that's what brings the character out of Russell T Davies's dialogue. Oftentimes, is the brashness of the production.
I'm kind of with John. I think.
I'm not saying
Russell T Davies has more wit in his scripts than Chris Chibnall, and if you've got that wit or that poetry or that kind of emotional impact that that particular Russell T Davies emotional impact, then you can get away with exposition. And with Stephen Moffat, I mean, I think Stephen Moffat obviously had expositional dialogue as well, like packed with it, but he does it with jokes and speed and glosses over it, and very witty dialogue that it's clear how Karen Gillan should perform this dialogue. You can, I assume, see on the page that it's a recognisably a Stephen Moffat script, and you know how to deliver it, how to pace it, how to perform it. With Chris Chibnall, I think there is a problem with the Chris Chibnall script.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I had in Broadchurch as well. It's a case of there's something on the page. It's just there's nothing to indicate to an actor what the character is in that dialogue. To me,
well, I thought it worked in Broadchurch, and I think it's a Doctor Who specific thing.
I got kicked out of the room with Broadchurch because my wife wouldn't let me watch it because I was just cringing at the dialogue constantly. So
I was fine with Broadchurch when it was first on. I couldn't rewatch it. I got 2 episodes in and couldn't get past them. But for me, it's his King Arthur thing. The worst
Camelot.
thing I've seen him do is the Camelot thing.
Yeah,
that really was a sort of a sackable offence from television. It was so bad.
That was taken out of his hands, though, insofar as I know. So I don't know how much of that in the end was him, because something happened with that that ended up not being the thing that he sat down to write.
Yeah.
Hence why it never went to any more series. Okay, let's talk about Ace and Tegan. I mean, are they the right ones?
I think so. I think it gets to the stage where they're the right age to be brought back. You're running. I mean, as much as I would like to see William Russell on screen again, I think it's probably got to the stage where you just can't. I think that
before you go any further,
yeah,
I'm just going to posit a little thought out there. I think we will see William Russell on screen, because if we're seeing those two, I think what they'll do is throw in a couple of cameos, single scene cameos from actors who couldn't come back and stay with the entire production.
Maybe single scene. But Nicola Bryant as well. I think Nicola Bryant is has to be on the list for returning. I think Sophie Aldred. I think it was a genuine tragedy that she missed her chance of coming back. Well, it was because of a tragedy, but she was going to come back in Sarah Jane
Adventures, yeah.
and then that sort of understandably stopped.
Tegan, of course, is the longest running living companion from the classic series.
And it's
insofar as I'm aware.
her return
Jamie?
that is the least likely because of Janet Fielding. I mean, that she was the genuine surprise to me. That she's the one that I wouldn't have expected to come back. But thinking about it, she's probably the one with most personality. She's got, however annoying she might have been at times, she's got a kind of a personality that would be interesting to see that in modern television, that kind of spikiness, that kind of anger, working with Ace, who also has a kind of a personality in the original series. Whereas something like bringing Nissa back,
Yeah, no.
you know,
But on this front, I was kind of halfway thinking you could bring Bonnie Langford back purely on the audience recognition, because obviously she's had all that TV work in EastEnders, so that would fit. Plus, I suppose again you speak to the history of the BBC to an extent there.
Well, I wouldn't. Again, Bonnie Langford's exactly the kind of actor you'd expect to see in a single scene cameo, right? If they're going to do something that sort of nods back to the past a lot, and the BBC's past in particular, somebody like Bonnie Langford turning up in Doctor Who because she's been in Doctor Who and because she also through that represents EastEnders is a perfect fit, right? On your point about Jamie, yes, I think Jamie was in more episodes, but I think Tegan's first and last episode were further apart. I could be wrong. I once worked it out, and I'm pretty sure I came to the conclusion that Tegan was second longest running after Sarah Jane in terms of first to last episode in chronological terms. I could be wrong. I might be misremembering. It was about 10 years ago I tried to work it out. Anything more? No, not by the look of it.
It is. I am excited, and actually, multi-companion stories, they're not really something that Doctor Who's done before.
Well,
Not
Journey's
hugely,
End.
yeah. But
Well,
that was,
not even. Well, yeah, but multi-classic series companions. I mean, you've had it a bit in Sarah Jane with Joe Grant and Sarah Jane Smith, but that's about it. And it tends to happen in the original series when, you know, in multi-Doctor stories. So to have a special that's kind of, you know, multi-companion stories, and also, yeah, I think Ace, from what we've heard, like hints of, has become an interesting character in herself. This kind of nods towards this foundation that she set up and her personality.
it remains to be seen whether that turns up on the telly.
I said the one thing, the gun she had was kind of reminiscent of the gun that's on one of the New Adventures on First Frontier. If you look at that,
Frontier, yeah.
Nice bit of design work there.
Yeah, probably a deliberate design reference. Who knows? Oh, one more note. I guess Finder's back. So
is he?
Yeah,
Yes.
Finder was in the trailer as well.
Oh, really? Oh.
And was the Cyberman Ashad, or was I imagining that?
Oh, I remembered the
him.
Cyberman guy. I'd have to rewatch some of Flux to remind myself of Vinder, because his entire storyline in Flux seemed to be looking for the girl, finding the girl, and that's it. So interesting to see what he does.
I'm interested to see how they do bring Ashad back, given where they left him, though.
Well, that's it, isn't it? I wonder. I suppose there's a possibility that part of the storyline of this is time being undone, especially if it's a Timeless Child storyline. So it could be that things that we thought were dead aren't dead. Things that we thought had happened haven't happened. Who knows? Right, I guess that's it for now. Next time on the Doctor Who part of the Strangers in Space feed, Matt's taking over.
Yeah.
I am relinquishing control for at least a short while, because what I thought would be nice now that we've got to the end of right at the very start of the Blue Box podcast, Lee and Mark and Simon and I did an episode on each of the, as it was then, 11 Doctors, or 10, because I think we were still midway through Matt Smith, so I don't think he was included. But we just talked about the personality, the themes that run through the era, that kind of stuff. And we'd all done that, but of course you guys haven't. And Matt, you missed out on that because you didn't join till later either. So I thought it would be nice if for the next few months, I guess, you guys kind of went off and did that all again so that you could have your versions of the conversations that we had. So Matt, you and John, and I don't know, maybe Ross, maybe Mark, will go off and have the conversations that we had. And, you know, the rest of us will perhaps show our faces every now and again, because we probably won't just do the 12 Doctors, 13 if we include Jodie Whittaker, because she's almost at an end over the next few months. So we might in and out with other things at the same time. But yeah, you guys are going to do some Doctor-centric episodes without us for a little bit.
Okay.
Right, until all of those things happen, I was JR.
I was John.
And I was Matt.
And we will speak again soon.